So, one of the things that I don't realize that people know in general, not just victims, is that not everyone who's saying untrue things is lying. Even if they went through a situation and you would think, oh, they're going to remember what they did or what they said. So then when they're saying something later that's incorrect, it's easy to think that that is a lie. And so, particularly for victims of abuse who are trying to figure out what is true and what's true about the abuser in particular. This can be really tricky. And so I had an incident with my dad, which is the one that precipitated me going into foster care. He ended up putting his hands around my neck and choking me to the ground. And so later on, when I was well into being an adult, I ended up kind of doing a little interview of him. I wanted to talk to him about sort of his perspective on what had happened, in general and also that specific incident. And what he said absolutely 100% surprised me. So in his description of this incident, I was yelling at him. I can 100% assure you that is absolutely incorrect. That is wrong. But I could tell that he believed that that was true. And as I mentioned in another video, sometimes we will misbelieve a thing because we can't tolerate our actions around it. So, for example, the third type of abuser I was talking about in yesterday's video, the feelings that they then have to justify in retrospect. His he had a feeling about that incident or about his response to that incident, and therefore he had to so he engaged in the violence, and then he had to retroactively justify it to himself. And since he couldn't like delete the fact that he'd done it from his brain, um it appears that he redid the narrative for himself. And so what he now believes to have happened is that I was yelling at him, and because I was yelling at him, he's not as culpable for what he did when I was 16. And so I'll give you an example. The reason why I know that I didn't yell at him is I have never yelled at my father except for the last time we had a conversation where I wasn't yelling, but I was like, look, the level of what I say? Basically talking about his level of self-centeredness or something like that. And I wasn't even yelling. I was just real emphatic. He might feel as if it's yelling that would be wrong, and also sort of like reflective of, again, this kind of process. But the reason why I know I didn't yell at him is because when I was much, much younger, my father told me if I ever called the police, that he would kill me. So I have always been very, very careful about how I speak to my father because this is not the first time he's attempted to kill me. It's not the first time he's, beaten or been violent with or laid his hands on me or my brother. So we were never yelly kids. We have never yelled at our father. Um, and so walking on eggshells. And in fact, this particular incident, I was setting a boundary, but I was being very careful about how I was doing it. So the incident is going to sound stupid, but it was his birthday, and because he's was a terrible person, is a terrible person, he didn't really have any friends. So he wanted me, his oldest child and daughter, to throw him a surprise party, and he said he would give me all of the money and give me the list of everyone he wanted invited, and if I could just like go ahead and like do that because no one else was going to do it for him. And he wanted to feel as if people wanted to do something like that for him. And I was getting to the point where I realized like I didn't know, I don't think I knew about the concept of being parentified quite yet at that point, but I knew that he had put me in this emotional place that I didn't think it was right for me to be in. It felt like more of a spouse place than like hey, I'm your daughter place. And so what I had said to him was, "Oh, I would be happy to take you to dinner because at that point I'd been working since I was 13, so I had money, and usually I would just give my money to my dad. So spending that money for us to go out to dinner, would basically be the same thing as far as I was concerned. So I was like, but I will be happy to take you out to dinner and basically pay for it. It's not like I had a car or was driving. So basically he would drive us to dinner and I would pay for it and I would be taking him out to dinner. And he got so angry because I wouldn't throw him a surprise party. And I dead ass, no way, no way am I misremembering that I was so calm. Even when he had his hands around my neck, I was so calm. I wasn't crying. I wasn't upset. I wasn't scared. I was like the most calm I've ever been. Well, I can't say I've ever been in my life. Every time I've had a near death experience, I've gotten very, very calm and not scared. So it was that. So I wasn't in an emotional state for yelling or screaming at him. And even if I were, it valid. And no reason to put one's hands around somebody's neck. But I in those moments I knew my life was in his hands, quite literally. I absolutely did not yell at this person. He 100% though believes that I was. And then therefore, the fact that he put his hands around my neck is maybe not justified, but understandable to him. So this honestly is one of the things that first made me realize, oh, people have different interactions with reality. So we think of reality as being objective, and it is. But there's our interaction with that reality. And so abusers, the reason they're abusers is because reality is not the way they want it to be. And so they're trying to cheat. They're trying to make it so that if they can make everybody else agree that reality is their false reality, then they'll feel like, oh, well, at least the reality I want to be true is true. Even if it's not really true, the fact that other people feel it and maybe even believe it, think it, or act as if it is true is enough for them to feel like it's true. So that way they can feel like the best, the most, the greatest, the smartest, or significant, or whatever the emotional inner thing that's driving them is. Um, yeah, it's the emperor's new clothes. Um, so I came across something later in life through a series of books by Terry Goodkind. It's called Wizard's First Rule. I am not recommending them, especially if you've been a victim of sexual assault. Absolutely not recommending these books. But he said something in one of them that I think is probably one of the most quoted things I've seen around kind of like this topic of lying. Okay, and what it is, he says, people will believe a lie because they want to believe it's true or because they're afraid it might be true. So much of the interactions we're having with abusers is over what reality is. And the abuser may not be lying in the sense that they know the truth and therefore they are saying the opposite so they can get some sort of benefit. I mean, there are those abusers, absolutely. But especially if you're dealing with an unintentional abuser, or like an emotions kind of abuser, that process may not be happening on the conscious level. It's happening on a subconscious level. They have alloplastic defenses that prevent them from accepting reality. Because if they accept reality, then they have to accept that they've done something terrible. They've been a bad person. They've done something bad. So their brain is protecting their ego identity by helping them to believe something that is adjacent maybe to the truth, but not like the truth. So what is more interesting, or equally as interesting to me, is why the victim ends up believing the lie, even though they also, honey, hi, even though they also went through that experience. They end up possibly believing what the abuser is saying about them or saying about the situation. And I think a lot of that goes back to that Wizard's First Rule from Terry Goodkind, that the victim is either believing the lie because they want to believe it's true or because they're afraid it's true. They're afraid maybe that they're the abuser. They're afraid maybe that they did something wrong. They're afraid maybe that they were a bad person. They're afraid that the reflection the abuser is mirroring back to them, or the voodoo doll the abuser is showing to them and saying, like, oh, this is who you are. They're afraid it's true. And it's often not. So this is kind of where I want to pivot to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is someone who to me is very clear about who this person is. And the fact that so many Christians voted for him absolutely astonished me, because he is to me the very definition of you will know them by their fruits. So I've been looking at people's reaction to Donald Trump for quite a minute here. Especially with he's self-documented all like many terrible things. This is not we're not arguing reality. He has documented himself on his shows and in public on TV, etc. All of these terrible things he's done and said. There's voluminous court records. Anyway, so it was interesting to me back sort of in 2000 and I don't know, 14, 15, 16. Why were so many people believing him, thinking that he was like just being honest and telling the truth? Because clearly, objectively, he is not. And the conclusion that I came to is that even though he wasn't telling the truth, his emotional state is sincere. So he is reading to them as being truthful, even though the words he's saying are not truthful. The emotions he's communicating when he's angry, when it's negative, when he's annoyed, irritated, whatever, that's truthful. The emotion behind the words that he's saying is truthful in terms of how he perceives things. And therefore, he's reading to people who want to believe it's true as being true and honest and telling it like it is, when that's not the case. So anyway, as always, when you are dealing with an abuser, you're dealing with someone who's trying to cheat, where reality isn't what they want it to be, and they don't like that. And so through force, coercion, power, misuse of power, abuse of you, the victim, they're going to try and make it as if their fantasy is actually reality. Because they can engage in a level enough of cognitive dissonance where they go, oh yes, now this is true and this is how it should be. I think on some level, again, maybe deep down, it depends on their level of self-awareness and if they're like an intentional abuser or an unintentional abuser. But there's a level on which they know it's not correct. And a lot of the reason you can know that is because when you ask questions, they'll often get angry, immediate to anger. Not, oh, I'm so glad you asked these questions. I'm so happy to talk about this thing that I believe is true. They're mad you don't automatically buy in to their false reality without any kind of, without just believing what they say. So it may not be that they are lying consciously. It could also be that the feelings that they're expressing are genuine to how they feel, regardless of whether or not the reason they feel those things is real. And so when you're a victim and you're in this situation, think about, am I believing this because I want it to be true or because I'm afraid it's true? Am I opening this door to considering this nonsense? Possibly because I have low self-esteem or I don't trust myself. If you have been a low status person in your life, maybe due to racism, sexism, maybe you're on the spectrum, neurodivergent, something. If you've been conditioned your entire life to think that you don't know what is true and real, or that your perspective on things is wrong, or who you are is wrong, or if you've been the black sheep in your family, and so they've taught you, conditioned you to believe that, the things you think and say and do are all wrong. Then when you're dealing with an abuser, that sense of confusion, that sense of doubting yourself, may accidentally be opening the door to possibly believing what the abuser's saying is true because you're afraid it might be. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.